talk a little more about accidentals. You have a number of exercises that you're working on that require you to use accidentals. So first of all, we'll start with the terms that are in your book and in your exercises. Sharp, flat, the natural, and then there's some that are not familiar. And actually, for beginning musicians, you won't be using them often at all. But that's why it's called music theory, because these things do exist in theory. They just aren't used all that much in practice until more advanced topics, more advanced lessons, and certainly more advanced music. So in addition to the sharp and the flat, there's also an accidental called the double sharp and the double flat. And I do want to make sure that you know at least what they look like and how you can figure out what the note is when you see those symbols. And then your book talks about two classifications of accidentals: accidentals that are chromatic accidentals and accidentals that are diatonic accidentals. We've already worked a little bit with inharmonic spellings. The easiest place to go there are the 5 black notes on the piano keyboard. A C sharp is the same note as a D flat. That's one of the reasons why the piano is such an easy instrument to start with. You just press that key and you're playing the note C sharp, and you're also playing the note D flat. If you were playing a wind instrument, it's a much more complicated process, but here's some symbols. The sharp looks like a tic-tac-toe board, looks like a hashtag symbol. The flat is kind of a squished up B. The natural looks a little bit like the sharp that's had a few parts taken away. And we'll talk more about the natural in a little while. Now here's these two unusual ones. Kind of a fancy looking X. That's the double sharp and the double flat. The double flat makes a little more sense because it looks like two little flats. So again, these two symbols are used really in more advanced music. They're used a lot in the classical piano repertory, the Baroque and classical periods. You see these symbols quite often. You also see them very often if you're accompanying singers. Singers don't have to learn fingerings, and singers can sing in any key. So whether a note's a flat, a sharp, or a double sharp, or a double flat, doesn't really matter to them. But it does to the people who are accompanying them. Okay, so real quick, and I bet you're pretty good with this by now, the sharp raises a pitch or a note 1/2 step. So if the note is A and you raise it a 1/2 step, now the note's A sharp. The flat lowers a pitch 1/2 step. So if the note's an E, you lower it, it's an E flat. Then we use the natural symbol if we're in the same measure of music and we need to cancel that sharp or that flat to change an E flat back to E or E natural as it's known. Now these two unusual characters, the double sharp, it raises a pitch 2/2 steps. And I'll show you that in a minute with a diagram of the piano keyboard. It's easier to look at than it is to talk about. Similarly, the double flat lowers a pitch 2/2 steps. It's a little complicated, but it'll be all right. Now, chromatic accidentals, your book describes this as being, well, for example, a 1/2 step, but it's the same letter. If you start my example here on the slide, I have C, and I go up a 1/2 step to the black note, C sharp. Because they both are C, C natural, C sharp, this is known as chromatic accidental. Now that C sharp, remember, has an inharmonic spelling. So if I go from C up to D flat, your book describes that as being a diatonic accidental. Okay, so let's go on now and take a look at where all these notes are. Still working with the piano keyboard. So I'll go ahead and write down the white notes. Bet you're doing real well with these. I don't think you're having too much trouble there. And the 5 black notes, same thing. If we start with the sharps, here's a C and a half step higher. Going to the right on the piano keyboard is C sharp. Here's a D. Going to the right on the piano keyboard is D sharp. The F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp. Now remember, we have these 2 half steps on the piano keyboard, E, F, and B, C. E and F don't have a black note in between them, so they're a half step. 2 adjacent keys. Doesn't matter what color they are. White note to a black note to a white note, or in these 2 cases, 2 white notes, E, F, and B, C. So, you know, a beginner may look at the piano and say, well, there is no E sharp, but it's an inharmonic spelling. So, the F, you're right, but it's also an E sharp. I'm going to finish putting in the rest of the flats on here now, because you know how this works. Here's D, D flat, E flat, and the 2 tricky ones, the F flat. Here's the white note F, down a half step to F flat. Here's the white note C, and down a half step. Now let's go on and take a look at double sharps and double flats. So here's the white note C, and you already know where C sharp is. A sharp raises a note a half step. There are cases, and I keep saying in more advanced music, where spelling requires you to raise it 2 half steps. And, you know, I chose the word spelling intentionally because it is a lot like spelling and using homonyms in English. And we've already talked about this. The there, T-H-E-R-E, T-H-E-Y, apostrophe R-E, or T-H-E-I-R. They sound exactly the same, but the spelling is different because of the meaning of the word. And which spelling you use depends on the context. And really, that's all I want to say about spelling and music right now, because I do want to try to keep it simple. But this is C, this is C sharp, and if you go one more half step up, it's also C double sharp. I mean, it's also C double sharp as in, it is the same key. It's the note D. The inharmonic spelling is D on the piano keyboard. So a double sharp raises it 2 half steps. There's D double sharp. It almost makes your eyes and teeth hurt when you look at these things. This black note here is the black note C sharp, D flat, and it's also a B double sharp. In fact, almost every key, in fact, all the keys on the piano except one have 3 spellings when you put in the sharps and flats, double sharps and double flats. So I'm putting a copy of this in your Canvas account, and I'll put a blank one on there as well so that you can write those down. And I would, keep that piano keyboard handy so that when you're working on your exercises, instead of trying to figure it out in your head, unless you've been playing the piano your whole life, instead of trying to figure it out in your head, it's so much easier to do when you have the chart in front of you.